Okay, there's just too much to cover, and I'm not even really sure where to begin. So let me begin like this. Hello, I'm Gregory. Welcome to 1 in 20 D&D. This is my weekly recap of the VÄRLDEN Reach, a 5e D&D campaign in which I am one of the players, and as an aside, having a fantastic time. This group is an amazing group of people that play an amazing group of characters run by a suitably amazing DM, and we are having a blast. Here in a nutshell is what happened in this episode. The party had defeated the the Death Tyrant in Riverrun that had turned all of the townspeople and Team 2 from the Vokter into zombies. After defeating them, they cleaned up the zombies that were still lying in the streets, put them on pyres to kind of consecrate them, and then headed back to Unity. On the way to Unity, there were some conversations. We also encountered a group of wagons, 4 wagons, being ambushed by orcs, goblins, bugbears, and a manticore. We were able to help the defenders of said wagon train defeat these seeming villains, only to find out that the wagon train was being led by a villain as well. It turned out that this was a wagon train of slaves heading from Handel towards Orison in order to go across the ocean to another continent where these slaves were to be brought. We decided to intervene and summarily essentially executed the owner of these slaves and freed the slaves and let the surviving few mercenaries that were guarding the train let them go with 100 gold pieces and a request/promise from them to basically keep their mouths shut. We then took these survivors, about 18 individuals, one family and 14 individuals, back with us to Unity, where they could be put in some temporary housing and help to kind of get back into society, so to speak. Once we got into Unity, we spoke with Commander Thane, and at that point, it was quite late in the evening, and we called it a day. Okay, that is the what happened during the session as far as like the progression of the session. Now, there were several important interchanges between the characters. I will do my best to kind of touch base on each of those. However, before I even do that, I want to say one important thing about the combat that we had during this session. It was a really, not just the combat, but the aftermath of the combat, like how we dealt with the leader of this caravan and the mercenaries and everything. It was kind of one of the first times where we seemed to kind of gel as a unit. Everyone did a really good job of kind of like doing what needed to be done. It's happened slightly in the past, but this time was pretty neat in how it all laid out. Jermaine, my character, had tons of fun because for the first time he got to use his polymorph spell and he transformed himself into a giant ape, throwing goblins through the air, smashing orcs on the head, and just generally having a good old riotous time. I imagined him as like King Kong or Donkey Kong or something like this, and I just had tons of fun with it. The others, of course, just dished out their own mayhem in the form of bows and spells and cuts from their steel. It was actually quite a quick fight in some sense because there were lots of combatants, so it took a little bit of time, but we handled the situation really efficiently, which was kind of cool. And again, when we handled the slaver, Usul, I guess was his name. Uso was his name. I liked how everyone dealt with the situation. It was interesting because Titus kind of inspired us to free the mercenaries, let them go and just pay for their silence, where Marana basically was like, that was the wrong thing to do. They made their choice. They deserve to die as well. And Jermaine was kind of in agreement with Marana on some levels, because he's concerned that, well, couldn't somebody else just pay them to find out, well, what happened to this wagon train? What happened to the slaves? But Jermaine took Titus at his word, and Titus said, hey, these guys, they're mercenaries. They understand a contract. They understand that they're being paid for their silence, and this $100 or this 100 gold pieces is a lot of money for them. They should be, content for now. Anyway, it was exciting, the combat, because of all the little elements that happened during the whole sequence. So some of the cool things that happened during the session started off right off the bat. And again, Charles, man, just totally took the show this time with his dialogue and actions as Titus. Titus and Alina had kind of gone off by themselves after we saw in the last session Titus's sister and her kind of bamfing off into who knows where. He went to find a tavern and a drink, and Alina followed him to make sure that he kind of stayed out of trouble. He went into a tavern, found a bottle, uncorked the bottle, and then sat down at a table and stared at the bottle. Doesn't do anything, doesn't take a drink, finally just gets frustrated and smashes the bottle against the wall. After a few moments, realizing that he's not going to drink, Alina kind of sits down at the table next to him, and they have this amazing interchange. It actually was quite a long interchange. She asked him, hey, do you want to talk about it, and so forth. Titus is like, I don't really talk about this kind of stuff, but what he ended up doing was, essentially, here's what happened. He basically said, I made some bad choices in my past. I had to deal with being beholden to someone else, giving fealty to someone else, and I'm done with that. I'm now going to give fealty to one. I am going to be the one that makes choices from now on, basically. So he says, I need your help with something. So he says, I need a brazier, I need some fire. So she goes off to figure out where she can get, a good amount of fire going, which turns out to be the blacksmith. She goes there, stokes up the forge. He goes off from house to house looking for something. Finds a iron statue of a large dog. Now, it was a small a scaled down statue, but the breed of the dog was like some kind of a big, mastiff or something like this. Goes and finds Alina in the forge, sets the iron, does a little bit of manipulation to the statue, and then sets it in the forge to heat up. Takes off his armor and his jerkin or tunic or whatever he's wearing, his shirt, down to his, naked down to his waist. And Alina sees that he's got on his right shoulder 2 brands. One is a hawk with spread wings on fire, obviously the Firehawks, his mercenary company, and the other is some dwarven runes, a fresher brand underneath. The hawk brand seems to be an older brand, and the runes are much more fresh. Now, he goes on to just, I can't even get into all of it. He just had this incredible dialogue between himself and Alina. And basically, I mean, the long and short of it is, at least from my perspective, now Charles may be thinking slightly differently. Alina, I'm sure, has her perspective, although well, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to leave that alone. So, I'm sure everyone has their own perspective. Gregory's perspective, Jermaine's perspective is that, well, Jermaine wasn't there, but Gregory's perspective as a player was that Titus pretty much claimed fealty to Alina. He basically said, I don't trust myself. I've had too many other people telling me what to do. I don't trust the Vactaire. I'm going to decide what I do, but I'm going to rely on you because I trust you. and I need you to hold me to my word. I am a dog of war, he says, basically, and I am going to be a dog of war, and I'm going to protect the people that I think deserve protection, especially you and your sister, of course, and this group that we have, our unit. And it's just like, it's a powerful moment between them, and I'm still kind of like beside myself about, wow, A was just awesome role playing, and then B, I'm like, well, what does it mean? And again, Jermaine has no clue that any of this happened, so it's kind of it's fun to think about, but it's also a challenge because I wasn't there. So Amanda as Alina, I'm sure she has her own thoughts about what it meant. And I'm sure, again, everyone else has their thoughts. I saw it as like, I mean, almost like Titus is telling Alina, like if he's a samurai, she's her daimyo. She's her daimyo, or however you want to pronounce it. She's her queen, or she's his queen or something. I mean, that's how it felt in the moment. It was like that intense. So really cool. Awesome stuff. One other thing that happened in River Run before everyone left was that Jermaine was kind of concerned after they had dealt with all the pyres and burning of the townsfolk. He was like, okay, where is everybody? We haven't seen Alina and Titus. You know, he's talking to Lily and Perdita. Marana had kind of gone off by herself. She ended up crawling up or climbing up onto a roof with Ku to like look at the sunset or just to have a perspective or you know, just get... She doesn't like being in cities, I think, or towns. So she could see the forest from the rooftops kind of thing. He's like, where'd everybody go? We're in this creepy ass town. I don't want us to be all split up. So he goes off and looks for Marana. And after about, half hour searching around, finds her up on the roof, or at least he's pretty sure he finds her up on the roof. Goes back and says, hey, here's my concern. Perdita's like, I think we handled it. We took care of this monster, and all the zombies became lifeless after that. I think they're going to be okay. And besides, they can handle themselves. So he's like, all right, fine. So they all kind of find houses to sleep in for the night. Jermaine makes sure to find one where he can kind of keep an eye on Marana, at least, like through the window. So one of the cool things that happened is Marana, after all this craziness she experienced, she goes up on the roof. And when she finally kind of relaxes, I think, her wings come out. And Jermaine is, I think, at this point, the only one who saw it, which is really cool. Now, we didn't really discuss that during the game, but TBQ and I had a discussion out of game to confirm, like, yeah, okay, that's what happened. I'm sharing it with you all because I think it's important. Jermaine had this moment of, like, seeing her and seeing the wings again, which he's totally fascinated by. Now, another important thing that happens is on the way back to Unity... Oh, no, sorry. Before we even left, again, the third important thing that happened before we left River Run. Perdita and Jermaine are sparring the next morning. This is what they do. Perdita kind of has some like martial arts kind of sword forms that she goes through. Jermaine is trying to start maybe learning some of them because he had formal training in the military and probably minor training as a bard, but Perdita is like, she's a trained fighter. She's got some skills and he wants to kind of learn them. Plus they do some fencing and sword play because they both are, as I say, sword and board, or that's kind of the way to say it, shield and a sword. Fighting is a very specific kind of fighting, so they kind of work together to hone their skills and such and stay fresh. So while they're in the middle of combat, she's like, hey, does the name or the word Evening Fall mean anything to you? And he's like, well, I'm not really sure. And she's like, how about the Elvish name, when she's, like the Elvish word? He's like, that's interesting. I'm not sure why. She kind of stops the sparring and says, well, look what I found, and shows him her locket. And on the inside of her locket, this is what happened at the end of the last session. Behind the picture is this little engraving, and in Elvish it says Evening Fall. So she's like, I think maybe, I don't know what it is. And I'm like, well, Jermaine says, well, maybe it's your name. Maybe it's your family name, or maybe even a nickname. He's like, he's really excited for her. This is like a clue, right? She's like, yeah, but maybe it's just the mark of a smith. And Jermaine's like, I don't think that's it, because usually a smith's mark is like a little image or an icon, or a, you know, like almost like a brand in another way, you know, a symbol usually of some sort. This is a name. This is clearly, it's a name that's been engraved. So anyway, they kind of leave it at that, and then go back to sparring, and Marana and Lily get the horses ready, and then everybody kind of comes back together. They have some breakfast, and they head out. So on the road back, there's another couple conversations. Not Marana. Perdita approaches Alina and asks her for the journals. So Alina like gives her the two more current journals, holds on to the oldest for herself. Perdita is just like frustrated, says, "Hey, okay, look, does anyone know what evening fall means?" And everyone's kind of like, you know, of course she gets a snarky comment from Marana, and everyone's kind of like, don't know, have no idea what that is. And she then spends the next kind of like day or two reading through the journals to try to find out. Alina kind of points to her where the ambush that we think was where Perdita was ambushed as a child, where that was written into these journals. Again, these are Alduin's journals, and the elf that we brought back to the Vactaire. And wow, okay, so Perdita also showed Jermaine, when they hit the river where she was found, she kind of pointed it out to him. Now on the road back, Marana is like, she stopped kicking Titus awake in the morning for their sparring. She's just been going out and hunting with Ku in the morning, and like dropping food literally on top of Jermaine, probably, or I imagine her like either literally throwing it on his head if he's sitting on the ground, or throwing it in his lap, otherwise just like tossing it at him or something ridiculous. So he, after the second, third day of this, he's kind of like, okay, Marana, what's going on? And she basically says, nothing, I'm fine. You know, this is Marana. That same day, he kind of rode up alongside her and just asked if he could ride with her, and then and she's like, don't talk, and it's fine. And so he struggles to stay silent the rest of the day and just rides alongside with her. And then at the end of the day, she kind of like, you know, as she's dismounting, she kind of gives him a nod, and he nods back and smiles, because he feels like, you know, they were bonding, which is freaking awesome for him. So Alina and Titus talked a little bit more. They continue to train at night. Like, Alina's still kind of teaching him some of these thieving skills and the thieves' cant and so forth. Then we encounter this band of wagons. So, oh my goodness, we deal with all that. Some kind of interchange happens there. Marana disagrees with Titus, does not think we're doing the right thing. After Titus and Marana have this exchange of like, we shouldn't be freeing them, and Titus is like, hey, these are just men, they have a job, they don't have a choice. If they don't take the job, they're going to lose their license, they're going to lose their livelihood as mercenaries. They're just men, they're just doing a job. It's distasteful. I had to do it. I had to deal with it. He basically admits, I was a slave, to which Jermaine is like, oh my god, you were a slave, Titus? Like, this is, terrible or whatever. And he's like, yeah, well, I was kind of lucky, and anyway, I eventually found myself here with you guys in the Vactaire, and we need to, we shouldn't be killing these mercenaries. They're just men. They're just doing what they can to provide for themselves and their families. So she's just like, Marana doesn't want to hear it. She doesn't agree with him at all. And basically looks at Alina and says, boy, you sure can pick 'em. To which Alina, comes over to Marana, gets in her face, what are you talking about? You want to talk about this right now? Because they've had some tension building. And there's, of course, the players know that they're sisters, but in the game, only Titus knows that they're sisters. And they're, they obviously got this stuff that they need to work out. And so, oh my goodness, Alina gets in Marana's face, and Marana's like, no, I'm not dealing with this right now. And Alina's like, you are the one who called it out in front of everybody, so let's deal with this. You obviously have a problem. Marana's like, nah, we have more important things to do. All right, so there's this huge interchange between the two of them. And then we get back to Unity, help these freed slaves kind of find, the city guard comes and kind of helps them. They didn't, Unity, the Vactaire, they help recovered or freed slaves. So they have a system, I guess, in place. Titus kind of knows about this. Jermaine is like, maybe you can take lead if if you already dealt with this. Why don't you make sure everything gets done right? And Jermaine talked to Marana on the way back to Unity, like between the wagon train and Unity, and said, I really agreed with you when we were back there, and I felt like I wanted to let you know that I thought you were right. And unfortunately, I had him ride off like right away. Like he just walked up, said something, and left because she doesn't like talking. At least that's what he thinks at this point. And of course, TBQ is like, well, I would have said something to you, but I'm like, oh, damn it. So that was kind of a funny sort of out of character moment. And then Lena and sorry, not Alina, Titus and Marana had a conversation the last night before we got to Unity. Titus is like, I'm sorry. I know we had a disagreement. I'm sorry I kind of, whatever, lost it back there or whatever. And he's trying to make a case for like, people's choices define them, but their past is their past, and the choices they made in the past, it's like everybody makes mistakes, everybody does horrible things, and we just have to do the best with what we've got. And Marana's like, you know what, I don't care about your past, and I don't care about the future, because who knows what that's going to be. What I care about is right now, and I'm going to base what I do and how I think or feel on what you do now, the choices you make now. And he's, again, he's like, I can't, we're at an impasse. We're not going to agree on how to handle this sort of thing. I think we did the right thing. You think we did the wrong thing. I'm sorry. I said, I wish you understood the kind of honor there is between soldiers. You haven't had the benefit of experiencing that, so you probably don't know it, or and I wish I could help you to see this. And she's just like, yeah, whatever. I think we did the wrong thing. Those men, they were part of it. They made their choice. They took the job. And who cares if they didn't know what the cargo was? That Titus is like, hey, you take a job, and it's a job, and all you do is you follow the train because that's what you're supposed to do. You don't look inside the train. You just do what you're asked to do. And Marana's like, that's not, everybody's got a choice. So they kind of had this impasse, and Titus kind of left the conversation just with like, living in the now is like, that's survival. That's not living. And as hard as it's been for me, as hard as it is to trust people and to believe and to know that they're looking out for you and that they've got your back, that's the choice I'm trying to make. And that's living. And he's kind of like trying to leave her with some advice or something, I guess. So that was kind of a cool moment. We get back to town. We go to see Commander Thane. Perdita is Jermaine is like right out the gate. He's like, hey, what's our policy on slavery? Because Jermaine is just this like, he's kind of this like country bumpkin in some ways, in the sense of like, he's intelligent and skilled enough to know when he needs to put on a front. And at the same time, he generally is not putting on a front. He's an honest guy. He's a straightforward guy. He doesn't like bullshit. He doesn't like games. He just wants to like get to the heart of things, like right away. That's where the gold is. That's where the gems are. That's where the story is. That's where he wants to be. So he walks into Thane's office with the whole party, and he's like, what do we do about slavery? Thane's like, well, I'm not really sure, and I guess this is a good point to sell you that tomorrow she, meaning the Undying One, wants to see you all, and maybe she can answer that question for you. So, to which Marana asks, hey, well, what would you say? And he's like, they don't deserve the air they breathe, which she kind of agrees with, and I have to say Jermaine definitely agrees with on some level. He told Marana, as well as some of the others, like, this is totally disgusting. It's tasteless. It makes him feel horrible, and he has no tolerance for it. And he, in fact, said that he didn't even believe that slavery was real. He thought like it was just a rumor. He didn't want to believe that it was real. And now that he's been faced with it, he's like, yeah, I ain't having that. So Thane tells us we have this thing. Then Perdita is like, well, I need to. Oh, and Lily was NPC for this adventure. Unfortunately, Tracy couldn't make it to this session, so she's out for the session. So Lily was kind of in a dark space after what we dealt with in Riverrun. And so she's been kind of quiet and kept to herself. And now she's like, okay, I'm just gonna go back to the house. I can't deal with Thane right now. So she left before we talked to him. While we were talking to him, Perdita says, hey, what does his name Evening Fall mean anything to you? And he's like, well, it's associated with Janus, the elder of the elves. So that's kind of interesting information. And then he's kind of like, okay, she wants to sit down and have a conversation with him, like one-on-one. So he's like, all right, y'all are dismissed. So the rest of us head back to our unit house. And Perdita has this conversation with Thane, asks him what he knows, shares the story, because she and Crag and her mom have discussed a lot of what has happened to her, but Thane doesn't know that much, apparently. So she kind of filled him in on some of the important details about the ambush and Alduin and all these like interlocking layers and levels of this story and what she's uncovered. And he's like, I don't know what to tell you. All I really know is that, it might have something to do with the Elder of the Elves. That name does, anyway. So we have more to discover there, which I can't wait. I am excited about that. And of course, Jermaine wants to help Perdita as well. His kind of adopted little sister, I guess. So we go back to the unit house, and the rest of us getting there first find a letter from Lily. She has been totally overwhelmed. She's kind of feels lost. So she went to see T, which is, of course, the head of the church or the temple in town, at the Ayu's temple in town. So that's her mentor. So she went back again. She's done this in other episodes, of course. She said, I need some time. I'm taking a leave from the group. I need some time to think and some help processing stuff. So it was a really beautiful. Tracy, brilliant. I love it. I think it's fantastic. Tracy wrote the letter from Lily to the group, and it's a nice way because she knew she was going to miss a couple sessions. Freaking fantastic. Super creative and really meaningful for the characters. So totally awesome. So when Perdita got back to the house, Jermaine waited up for her. Alina and Titus kind of had a quick conversation at the house. Like, Alina's like, hey, are you okay? And Titus is like, this is just the way it is. I got to deal with it. We all got our stuff. This was kind of the theme of the session, I think, is like everybody's done bad things. And so that was interesting, of course. They had a quick conversation before bed. When Perdita got back to this house, Jermaine is like, hey, everything okay? Did you go see your mom? She's like, no. All right, fine. And then what did Thane have to say? Not much. Okay, and this was after Perdita had a moment to read the letter from Lily, and they're just like lounging. We figure there's a couple of nice comfy chairs in front of the fire in our living room, family room, whatever. So we're just sitting and kind of having this conversation. So the last really fun, cool thing that happened in this session, and to me, again, for me as Gregory and Jermaine, for me was one of the most important moments in the session, actually, was that when Perdita and Jermaine were sitting and kind of like winding down at the end of the night, Jermaine kind of, again, he's this forward, kind of bold, direct guy, and he basically said, may I ask you a question? And he asks her about the scar on her face, because when she sat down, she took off her mask and she took off her armor to relax. And I assume Jermaine is out of his armor at this point too. So they're just relaxing and they're just being friends and relaxing and enjoying themselves and having conversation. And he says, I'm really curious why you never had it healed. I don't know a lot about healing magic. I know a little bit. I can do a little bit, but it's my understanding that, pretty much anything can be healed. How come you still wear the scar? And she's like, well, I don't really know. I've never really thought about it. Maybe it's because, some scars are more traumatic and they linger, or, I had a friend who died, and it was sweet because Morgan totally like ad-libbed, totally improv this whole thing, and it was really awesome. So she's like, I had this friend who died and was brought back. She ended up with this white streak in her hair that, she couldn't dye it. Nothing. It didn't go away. It was just like she had a white streak in her hair, and that's that. So maybe it's something like that. And so Jermaine is like, it says a lot about you, and he wanted her to know. He shared with her. He's like, I really want you to know how much respect I have for you. That you're younger than I am, Jermaine to Perdita. You're younger than I am, and yet you carry yourself so maturely and so well. You're so grounded and clear thinking, and your heart's in the right place, or whatever. I mean, this is Gregory explaining what he said, not word for word, of course. He's like, I really just want you to know how much I respect you. I trust you and I respect you. And I think, the others might disagree. I think you're kind of the leader of this group. You have the most level head. You have the most experience with the Vokter, so you kind of have a better sense of what's going on and what we should be doing from one situation to the next. And I trust you and I respect you for that. And I appreciate that. And she's like, well, I don't always feel like that. I don't always feel like I got a level head, but thank you. And so they kind of just left it at that. They just had this nice, intimate moment, and like, she's like, I'm kind of an open book at this point. And Jermaine says the same. He's like, I am too. And please, anything you ever want to ask, feel free. I have lots of stories to tell. I love telling them. And right now I'm going to bed, so no more stories tonight. Or no stories tonight. And that's how we ended the session. It was really beautiful. The only other thing that I have to mention that happened in the session, because as a player, it was kind of funny and silly to me. One of the moments when Marana and Titus were kind of having their conversation at night about like their disagreement, Marana said something in effect about like, Titus said something like, people make poor choices or whatever. You can't like condemn people for making poor choices. And Marana says something to the effect of like, Jermaine's wardrobe is a poor choice. This is slavery. And all those people, the slave driver, the slave sellers and buyers, and the mercenaries helping them, they're making poor choice. That's not a poor choice. It's a horrible thing. And Gregory is thinking like, Jermaine just wears like common clothes, a breastplate. He's pretty straightforward. And like afterwards thinking about it and talking about it with TBQ, it's like for her sensibilities, he wears like a colorful sash around his waist, of course. And of course he's got his instruments and he's a colorful person for sure. But his clothing is fairly sedate and mundane and just like, leather buff coat is what it's called. That's what you wear under a breastplate, not cotton leather. And then the breastplate and gloves and, just his traveling clothes and a cloak. And maybe he's got like a bright sash, like this bright sash around his waist. So for her, I guess that's, maybe she had I'm sure that Marana / TBQ had a different idea maybe of what Jermaine looks like. He is a bard and all that. So it was just this funny moment, again, out of character. I'm sitting there going, really? And so anyway, we have so much fun in these sessions. I hope you all continue to keep checking in on these recaps and stay tuned for lots more coming. I think I have a surprise for next week. So we'll see. I have to do some planning and see how it turns out, but I may have a surprise for everyone for the next recap. So stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for other videos. I've got them coming on the way. I appreciate you stopping in. I appreciate all the subscriptions. I almost have 30 subscribers. Woohoo! So please share. I do appreciate that as well. I want to say, thank you again. Thank you for stopping in. Thank you for listening to my silliness and probably madness, but definitely silliness and trying to wrap my head around what happened last week so that when we play again this week, I kind of know where I'm coming from, or where Jermaine is coming from anyway. So that's all for tonight. Thanks for stopping in. Thanks for checking it out. I hope to see you at a table someday. And keep rolling 20s.